Hi, welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck, and we're finishing Shaston now, the fourth part. Sue has been able to leave Phillotson. He's just let her go, which is, as you're going to see, kind of controversial in this town, that you just let a woman do that. So it's almost like these guys are on the run, and she writes him a letter. She says, not exactly this way, but let's not screw this up like you did the last time. Actually be there to meet me. And when he gets there, of course, she's happy to see him, but she thinks, we're getting off here, right? At Melchester. And he says, no, we can't. We possibly couldn't live here. People know me. I mean, what are they going to think? So he says, I've booked a hotel to Aldbrickham. And if you notice, the next chapter is Aldbrickham and elsewhere, indicating that they have to keep moving along. Every time they kind of screw up, they got to go somewhere else. But there's only so many places they can go. So he mentions that he gets a hotel at the Temperance Hotel, and she says, did you get 2 rooms? And he's, no, I just got 1. And then this sets her off. And poor Jude has gone to a lot of trouble to get there. He's given up his work at the cathedral. She asks about that, and he says, I've given up a lot more than that. And he says that the church is no more to me. Let it lie. I'm not going to be one of those saints. And he quotes a Browning poem, like the soldier saints who row by row burn upward to their bliss. He says, I'm not going to be one of those people ever. In fact, he says, that my bliss is not upward anymore. My bliss is here. And you start seeing a lot of what Jude says to Sue almost reminds me of Romeo and Juliet in a way. When they confess their love to each other, and she's like, you're the god of my idolatry. It was blasphemy to say that, and Shakespeare, of course, was playing with this idea of you worshiping another person, obviously to your own risk, but that's, he's given up, he's replaced the church with her, and now she's the heaven. And he makes a lot of statements that kind of suggest that, my will is your will. And it's no longer me trying to find myself closer to God. It's only you. And that's a very dangerous place to be, too, when you put everything into one person. And the other complicated thing about that is she doesn't give the same amount back to him. And he knows this. And he's very aware. Even, he's constantly questioning whether she even really loves him. And I'll get to that. But before that, they have this conversation about how good it was of Phillotson to let her go. And she's talking about him, about, how she really admires him now. And she says, according to the rule of women's whims, I suppose I ought to suddenly love him because he has let me go so generously and unexpectedly, she answered, smiling. She's kind of enjoying this. But I'm so cold and devoid of gratitude or something that even this generosity hasn't made me love him or repent or want to stay with him as a wife. Although I do feel like I like his large-mindedness and respect him more than ever. And Jude concedes, it may not have worked well for us if he had been less kind. And you had run away against his will, murmured Jude. And she says, oh, that's something I would have never done. And he kind of looks at her curiously, and then he tries to kiss her. And she's very prudish and says, no, we're not going to do that. Now, they just kissed the last time, and it's had the description that it was actually long It was a long kiss. And now he can't get a kiss again. And, she's going to accuse him of being, greedy with this. Like, don't just think that because I'm running off with you that we're going to be lovers now. I never said that. So, what are they? Are they cousins? Are they lovers? I mean, Jude is in this situation like, what do I do? I can't physically be attracted to you? And he tells her that it's cruel. And at this point, he also tells her that Arabella has written because she wants a divorce. And so he's, of course, going to, do what he can. Now, it's kind of ambiguous as to what that is actually going to entail. Like, how is that going to work? Because getting a divorce was not exactly easy during this time. But it's good news to her either way. Okay, so then they get into it about the room, and then he says to her, "My dear one, your happiness is more to me than anything, although we seem to be on the verge of quarreling so often. And your will is law to me." And see, it's almost like a biblical statement. Your will now is law to me. And I am something more than mere selfish fellow, I hope. Have it as you wish. We'll do this any way that you want to. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't frustrate Jude, or question, what is she really doing with me? What are we doing here? And anyway, she gives him a letter that was from Phillotson, and Phillotson says, I only make one condition, that you're good to her, you're tender, you're kind. Even love can be cruel sometimes. And that you just take care of her. That's all I ask. And, he says, he is a good fellow. And this kind of gets her back to thinking about, how it's almost attractive to her now, the way Phillotson is behaving. And she says, if I had loved him ever so little as a wife, I would go back to him even now. And Jude says, but you don't, do you? It is true, so terribly true. I don't. Nor me neither, I fear, he said pettishly. Not anybody, perhaps. So sometimes when I'm vexed with you, I think you are incapable of real love. And she says, that's not good and loyal of you. And so she has definitely an expectation of how you should feel. It's almost like somebody who wants to control how someone else is reacting. He can't help. I mean, he's reacting better than most men, I think. Under the circumstances, he's doing his best. But she, and he even reproaches her about this. I'm conceding everything to you. You concede nothing to me. And she says, well, I did let you kiss me. And he says, one time. And that's when she says, well, don't be a greedy boy. And he says, this is a queer elopement. And she brings up that hotel again. I can't possibly stay there because you sent that telegram saying one room, and he says, very well, there'll be some open, no doubt. I have sometimes thought, since you're marrying Phillotson, because of a stupid scandal, that under the affection of independent views, you're as enslaved to social code as any woman I know. And that's going to kind of hit her hard. But she says, not mentally, but I haven't the courage of my views. As I said before, I didn't marry him altogether because of the scandal. But sometimes a woman's love of being loved gets the better of her conscience. And though she agonizes at the thought of treating a man cruelly, she encourages him to love her while she doesn't love him at all. So then, when she sees him suffering, her remorse sets in, and she does what she can to repair the wrong. And what she's explaining here is pretty much just the way infatuation works. And that this love of being loved, and in a little bit you see that she wants him to quote Shelley's poem that is about infatuation, that is about, you know, is it really that I love this person, or do I just love to love? You know, what happens when you're getting a lot of attention from somebody? She's admitting that, you know what, when somebody really adores you, it's pretty tempting to just keep letting them adore you because it's an ego thing. I mean, it's not real, but these are things that happen. And he says to her, you know, you simply mean that you flirted outrageously with him, poor old chap, and then repented. And I'm not sure exactly where, but there is a point where Hardy says that Jude thinks about that guy at Christminster and how he came to his demise by being in love with Sue, and then he gets so sick and then he dies. That's in the back of Jude's mind. Like, what does this woman do to men? And Phillotson is going to get sick as well, as you'll see in the next chapter. So, you know, it's very risky loving someone like her. And so they get to the other hotel because she very stubbornly won't go to the Temperance Hotel. But because of that, he ends up accidentally at the same hotel that he and Arabella stayed at. Remember how I said there's kind of that missing time in between? We don't really know if they stayed in the same room. Apparently they did. And we know this because once they get there, a maid says, you know, I remember seeing your friend, your relation over there, and he was with another woman. And she says, well, how long ago was that? And she said, it's about a month ago. Only a month? What does that mean? And the maid is sure to mention that this woman was a fine, full-figured woman, very handsome, and they actually had this room. So now Sue is, you know, she's going to have an absolute fit over this with Jude. And, you know, says, how can you do this to me? You know, I trusted you. I've run off with you. And Jude makes a very good logical argument, I think. He says, but by your own wish, dear Sue, we are only to be friends, not lovers. It is very inconsistent of you, too. Friends can be jealous. I don't see that. You concede nothing to me, and I have to concede everything to you. After all, you were on good terms with your husband at that time. No, I wasn't, Jude. So now she's really regretting that Temperance Hotel sure does look good at this point. And she says, you know, if I had known that we would end up here, I would have preferred to go there. But then she contradicts herself again and, you know, says that she's never going to go to that Temperance Hotel, even though she just said before that would be better. But then she goes back and forth, and it's always kind of back and forth with Sue. So he says, don't be angry, and she says, I am not. Obviously she is. And this is where she says, but I shan't go to the Temperance Hotel. He laughed. Never mind, he said. So that I am near you, I am comparatively happy. It is more than this earthly wretch called me deserves. You, spirit, you disembodied creature, you dear, sweet, tantalizing phantom, hardly flesh at all. So when I put my arms around you, I almost expect them to pass through you, as through air. Forgive me for being gross, as you call it. And being gross, well, it's not really gross, it's just human. You know, it's human for him to want affection from her. I mean, they are running off as lovers. So, but in comparison, he's always thinking about himself as just this, animal passion and, this flesh that I cannot kill. And then look at you. I mean, you probably don't ever need to have sex ever. And because you're not even fully flesh at all, you're spirit. And what's interesting is right after that is this is the description that Percy Shelley uses in his poem, and she wants him to say these lines to her from this poem. And I think that Hardy probably got the description of Sue from Shelley's poem. And the poem is called Epipsychidion. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that right. It's pronounced a couple different ways. But she says, say those pretty lines then from Shelley's Epipsychidion. As if they mean me, she is solicited, slanting up closer to him as they stood. Don't you know them? And then she quotes it, actually. There was a being whom my spirit oft met on its visioned wanderings far aloft, a seraph of heaven, too gentle to be human, veiling beneath that radiant form of woman. And so what Shelley's saying is kind of describing Sue. And remember, Phillotson says earlier when his friend says, is it platonic? And he says, well, no, it's more Shelleyan. That's no accident. I think Hardy had Sue in mind because of this poem. And the poem is saying, she's such a spiritual, not being in the religious sense, but being in the sense that you can't physically get a hold of this woman. And it's sort of elusive, just as, infatuation. In this poem, Shelley's trying to come to terms with infatuation, of what causes us to just want to love. And why does it just pass on through us, from one to another? You don't know if someone's going to keep loving you or if they're going to move on. And that it's sort of like, intellectual beauty, where he talks about like the mist and the mountains. It's there and then it's gone. And I think all of this is kind of, the word is elusive for Sue. He can't get a hold of her. He can't physically have her. So in a way, she becomes kind of like Christminster, kind of like what that elusive degree, whatever he thinks that's going to be, in his imagination, that longing, that wanting. But she becomes even more of that, because then she also replaces his religion. And that's a dangerous place to be. So I'm just going to kind of summarize the next chapter, because it's not very long, but it's kind of like, in the meantime, what's happening with Phillotson. And, people at first, when Sue was replaced by someone else, people at first didn't really think anything of it. But then eventually, they start asking some questions. And Phillotson, to his credit, does not really want to lie about this. And he also doesn't feel like he's in the wrong for letting her go. But according to the town, he is. And he can't be a teacher with these kind of views, because, what are the students going to end up thinking? It's going to rub off. His nonconformity might rub off on them, and we don't want that. So he gets pulled in by like a supervisor and says, I know these rumors, are they true? Did she just run off? Now, had she just run away and run off, Phillotson wouldn't be guilty of anything, because he couldn't help it. She took off. I don't know where she is. But the fact that, he says, well, actually, I gave my consent. This is what baffles people. What? You gave your consent? And he's not backing off on this. He's very convicted. Now, I say that in a very short, he's heroic for a short time. He doesn't stay that way, as you'll see in the end. But for now, he it kind of almost reminds me of like what Atticus says in To Kill a Mockingbird. The only thing that does not abide by majority rule is a man's conscience. And in his conscience, he has done the right thing by letting her go and not making her stay against her will, not making her miserable, because people should be free. But this is a novel idea for this town and for this time. So it gets back to parents. Then they have kind of like a school board meeting, trying to figure out whether they should let him go, because he's not going to resign. He's being very stubborn. Like, if they want to put me out, they can put me out, but I'm not going to stand here and admit that I did something wrong by letting her go when I didn't. And so it's just a radical idea. So this is brought out. The community gets to hear it out. And what happens is, it's like a town hall meeting, and what Hardy says is the respectable inhabitants of the town, the well-to-do people, are totally against Phillotson. But there's another crowd that comes in. There's the itinerant group that runs the fairs, like the marketplace. They're the lower class people. And they agree with Phillotson. In fact, they admire him and say, yeah, you know what? I was in this kind of situation too. And, I would be proud of somebody who actually did something humane. And it becomes such a debate that it becomes into like a fight. And, the blackboard was split and the ink bottle was spilled over, and somebody took a map and put it down on someone else's head, and his head went through the map. Just total riot, chaos happens. And Phillotson's watching this going, oh my God, maybe I should have resigned. This isn't worth it. And he's just so broken by all of this behavior that he ends up getting ill, which is very typical in these Victorian novels. When something happens drastic, an illness, a serious illness, near death, is going to follow. But if you think about it, they're not completely far off, because we know when someone gets ill, seriously, there's probably a connection to stress. It's just that what we see as stress is more like long-term stress, and what they saw stressful could have been just one event, So his faithful friend comes by, Gillingham, who tried to warn him that all this was going to happen. And now he sees that his friend is sick. And, one of the things that he said earlier that I forgot to mention is that, if it were him, he would just smack her. That's what she really needs. She needs a good smack in the face, is what Gillingham thinks. Just control her like she's a child. And, the other part I forgot to mention last time is that she actually jumps out of a window. And she reminds, I forgot to mention it this time too, because she tells Jude, when she no longer knows what she's saying about why she could be jealous or anything like that I jumped out of a window, okay? That's how crazy I felt by being with him. So no, I wasn't okay with my husband while you were with Arabella. It was miserable. But he doesn't know all this. And, the friend doesn't actually know all this either, that she's going to lose her mind if she stays. And, he doesn't want to exacerbate it. So at any rate, once the friend sees that he's sick, he decides, I'm going to go and write Sue. She doesn't know where she is. Maybe Melchester. I think it's the widow Edelyn who gets it and forwards it. I don't know how these people, it has to conveniently work out like this for the novel to work. So anyway, Sue gets the message, and suddenly she's there with Phillotson. Just out of the blue. She shows up, and she's very sympathetic to him and very sweet to him, and says, I love you as a friend. I don't want to see you sick. I hope that you don't hate me. And he says, of course, I don't hate you. And she tries to cheer him up just by looking at this sunset, which I would imagine if you watched the video when I first introduced Shaston, that this is a beautiful, town. And it's on they're on a hill. And so the view is really pretty. And he says, what an odd creature you are, showing up after everything that just happened. And she doesn't know exactly what happened. And she didn't know that, a fight broke out in the town hall meeting. But, he doesn't burden her with a whole lot. But he does ask for her, to make up with him and to stay. And she just says, no, you can't do that. Not after everything. I can't. So it's kind of like a last-ditch effort to don't leave me. Don't go, Sue. And she's like, well, I got to meet Jude, and seeing that you're not, on your deathbed, I think I'll go. And so she goes. The friend comes back to check on him, and he says that she was here, and then she left. And he says, Mrs. Phillotson, did you make up with her? And he says, no, she just came and patted my pillow with her little white hand and played the thoughtful nurse for half an hour and went away. Well, I'm hanged, the little hussy. That's what the friend says. And he says, what did you say? What did you say about my wife? And like, well, what I mean is that she's this capricious, tantalizing little woman, who really needs to be put in her place. But as it is, Phillotson says, I'm not going to argue the point with you. I can't really explain it, but it's more just on my conscience that I have to follow. And I can't help also feeling for her and feeling for Jude. So it ends with Gillingham saying, I may disagree with your motive, he said gently, for he respected views he could not share. I respect your opinion, but I think you're right in your determination if you can carry it out. And at this point, he mentioned that Jude's situation, he has a wife, and the guy's like, wait, what? He's married too? And yeah, he's going to get a divorce. And so I'm starting to think maybe I should do that for Sue. So it just keeps getting worse. But he says, if you can carry it out. I doubt, however, if you can. I doubt he's doubting the divorce is possible. All right, so next time I'll go over the beginning of part the 5th at Aldbrickham and elsewhere. All right, thanks for listening. Bye.